So my research looks at two very different issues, the idea of mis and disinformation and book banning. And I've taken a look at what is librarians' voice in the national conversation on these two different issues. So let's look at mis and disinformation first. Librarians have had a lot to say about mis and disinformation. We've held dozens of webinars, conferences, across all around the world, actually, about this topic over the last few years. And a meta-analysis of this research found 27 journal articles published just between 2018 and 2021 on this topic. So I looked at what are these articles saying? What is this research saying? And a lot of it looks at pedagogy. How do we teach our students how to evaluate the information that they come across? So how do they identify mis and disinformation? A lot of it is pedagogy. Us talking to other librarians about how we teach. Librarians also have had a lot to say about book bans and challenges and have been impacted quite a bit. More than 1,200 challenges were reported in 2022, and 37% of school librarians say challenges have influenced their purchasing decisions. So it's really impacted what they've been buying. And also 24% of school librarians say that they have been harassed over their book displays and their contents. So it's really a hot button issue at the moment in our profession. So what I looked at was, is librarians' disinformation expertise recognized outside of the library field nationally? What is that librarian voice on that issue? And also, what voice do librarians have in national news stories about book bans and challenges? And what implications does that voice have, or lack thereof, in these national conversations on these issues? So here is my method. When it came to disinformation, I located 124 New York Times articles between November 2016 and the end of December 2022 that had fake news or disinformation in the headline. And in terms of book bans and challenges, I located 42 New York Times, USA Today, and Washington Post articles in the last almost 2 years that had book ban, challenge, or removal in their headlines. And I looked at who the experts were who were quoted in these news stories and what their occupations were. So who's considered the expert in these stories? And when it came to disinformation, we're at the bottom of the pile. So across 761 quotes, librarians or library workers were only quoted 5 times. And I hate to say it, but a majority of those quotes were in one story that focused really on what the librarian was wearing and his attire. So we're not really considered experts in that national conversation. However, if you look at book bans and challenges, we're at the top. So in terms of a little over 300 articles, we were quoted 77 times, and we were the experts that were quoted most often. So what does this all mean? Whether or not librarians are recognized as experts depends on the issue. Librarians' expertise when it comes to news literacy is really missing from the national conversation. And I've also looked at what are the solutions that are discussed, and it's not education. So yeah, we're missing from that conversation. Librarians are the dominant experts when it comes to book bans and challenges, and this may very well impact the national narrative on these issues. I'm digging a little bit deeper into who are the librarians who were quoted, so look for more research on that. And I think this really raises questions about what makes librarian voice on these two issues so very different. Why are librarians part of the national conversation on one issue and not on the other? So Gwen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joyce. And we're going to have questions at the end, although if anyone has a clarification question, we will be happy to take those at the moment. And now I'd like to move to the Q&A portion. And the first question, we had a great pre-discussion. And the first question I'm going to give to Mihoko and ask, tell me about navigating the pressure not to speak versus speaking for your particular context.
Thank you, Gwen. Well, first of all, thank you for organizing the panel. It's a privilege to be at the table, to be able to speak. So thank you. I think that the pressure not to speak comes from probably not personal, it's probably organizational, process-oriented. Sometimes I wonder, am I the right person for this topic? So it's sometimes on my side, I'm sort of hesitating to make sure that I'm the right person for that opportunity, even if I know about the topic itself, organizationally. What about my dean? What about faculty members? And what about my colleagues? So I'm thinking about all these things. It's not about my capability. I want to speak, but sometimes I have those concerns. But at the same time, I cannot afford to wait for opportunities to come to me. I've had to self-advocate. I find it easy to talk about, for example, I get invited to talk about DEI, and I keep saying, well, what I do here is actually collection Sky communications, and I keep talking about what I can provide. But if you continue seeing the same faces again and again at meetings, conferences, and you start wondering, is this the right space for me? So it's not about my capability or interest. Sometimes both need to happen for me to be effective in that space.
Thank you. Nancy?
So this question, if I had been answering this question 6 weeks ago, you may have gotten a much different answer. But I will say that when I choose not to speak up at this point is if the topic is one that, if I'm being recorded, if the topic is one that is inflammatory from a political perspective in Florida, or that I think will get back to my dean. And to give an example of why that matters, we have a social media account for the FIU libraries, and the person who runs that put a post up. They do these funny Fridays memes. And so they put a post up on Twitter that I didn't pay attention to because I'm not on Twitter, because I don't care about Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. And so I'm wandering around TJ Maxx or something looking for furniture because I've been there for 3 minutes on a Saturday, and I get a text from the provost, who is my boss. And I think, oh, this can't be good because she's texting me on a Saturday. And she has a screenshot of the Twitter post, which says, it's a little placard outside a coffee shop that says, live your life so that if it was a book, it would be banned in Florida. Now, whether or not I thought it was funny, personally, I actually thought it was hysterical, but professionally, it was completely inappropriate for the FIU libraries to post that. So I had to then contact my marketing person on the weekend, which took much longer than it should have to say, I need you to remove this post, and then had to now start a process where I have to approve all the posts, and now I have another job responsibility that's done. So speaking up and speaking out is really contextual for me, but if there is something that I am passionate about, I will find a way to speak about it while still covering my behind, and that is where my law degree comes in very, very handy.
So I have a follow-up question, because when we were discussing the idea of risk and assessment of risk came up, and could you talk a little more about the legal background and like the risk assessment that you're...
Oh goodness. So it's, to me, it's about the language. So I will be very careful about the words I use, again, because of where I live and because I am a state employee. But that doesn't mean I won't speak, I guess. To my mind, I just have to be very careful about what I speak up about and when. And I also have this idea that for example, some of the legislation right now that is being proposed and or that has passed that says we cannot favor one group over the other, for example, while the people who sponsored that legislation may have had one thing in mind, I would love to see us using that language that they have now codified to actually address the real problem. So if we can't give preference, for example, to one particular group of people over the other, that to me is just an argument for dismantling the system, because our current system absolutely gives preference to one group of people over all others, because that group of people has been in power since the founding of this lovely nation.
And Joyce, you had a really interesting question about, interesting experience about being the token librarian at a conference.
Yeah. So my background is in mass communication and communication. And so what happened was I was invited to a fact-checking conference in early 2017, and it was at the National Press Club. And I went, and there must have been a couple hundred people in the room, all talking about how do we address mis and disinformation. It was all the national fact-checking organizations. It was so a lot of think tanks. There were ton of national news outlets there. And I look around, and I am the only librarian in the room. And so I felt at that moment this weight of my words and the perspective that I was bringing to this. What was interesting is that in the breaks, a number of news outlets, a number of participants in this event came up to me and said, I never thought of librarians as having this expertise or being connected on this issue, but it makes a lot of sense. And since then, I've had a number of instances where I've been contacted by heads of community engagement organizations for universities and things like that, saying, oh, we're having this summit on mis and disinformation. I'm going to be talking about this. We really should have invited the library, huh? I'm like, yeah, yeah, we have a lot to say on this issue. So a lot of times I think about when deciding whether or not to speak up, what happens if I stay silent? What happens if my voice as an information professional isn't part of that conversation? And so it's been interesting with my research that I've seen how that can really impact the national conversation on an issue when a particular group isn't at the table.
So in our discussion, we had a pretty interesting discussion, and Mihoko, you had kicked it off, about organizational strategies and the way that we talked a lot about meetings, which I'm sure you're all like very focused on. So could you talk a little about that strategy you have for when am I speaking up and when am I not speaking up, and we all talked about the importance of allies.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So first of all, I try to be prepared, but then before those meetings, especially the topic is controversial, I try to identify co-conspirators and try to support each other in that space. But I also choose the occasion very carefully, but I also be ready to speak up because I cannot afford to wait too long. But I think that when opportunities arise, in my experience, it's better just to say something. For example, when somebody says that, oh, this is an announcement topic, and I can raise my hand. Oh, sorry, I thought that it was a discussion topic, and I was very much looking forward to discussing with you. So before things are decided or announced, I have had to raise my hand in a diplomatic manner without creating enemies, but sometimes you have to decide quickly.
And could you talk more about your co-conspirators?
So co-conspirators are people who can afford to take risks, partly because they're coming from dominant group or they are in a secure place. They might be fully tenured or they have organizational power and they can take risks for many different reasons. And they are willing to share their power to benefit others. So that's the concept that I use.
Nancy?
Give me the question again in a way that, no, just give me the question again. That's my full sentence.
It's about the sort of, I would almost say, micro strategies
Got
to
it.
manage. Again, Mihoko mentioned penalties for speaking up
Yes.
versus opportunities, and the question of allies.
So, oh, good Lord. I love your term co-conspirators versus allies because I think in many regards, lots of people say they're an ally, but that I don't know where the action is coming in. Like, it's very easy to say I'm an ally, but if you can't demonstrate to me how you're an ally, I kind of don't care. But I think that the challenge that I would say I'm having, no, it's not even the challenge. The thing I want to do now is make sure, for example, that my co-conspirators or allies, or frankly, the relationships I'm developing are with people who value the work that the library does, so they're already on our side, but also I'm trying to make sure I'm giving them the data, the information they need that supports their reasons for supporting the library. So it's not just you should love the library because we support your research needs. It's what are we specifically doing for your department, for example? How has our faculty liaison impacted your grant dollars? So that to help them realize that the true value and that being vested in what we do for them is elemental to what they do. And so that way, to me, if they can be a library advocate without me ever having to say anything or be in the room, then that spreads the work that we do. It multiplies it to a degree that I can't do on my own. So,
Can I add something quickly? So you said that you don't like the word ally. So I tend to agree with that. And because there are many performative allies who are happy to work with you in a performative manner, but still occupy the center stage. And so that's different from being a co-conspirator. So thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Joyce, anything to add?
I think it's really important to, as Mihoko said, to build that coalition when you're going to speak out. And I've found it's really important to have the support of the person up the chain from you. A lot of times I will sit down with my dean and say, this is what I'm thinking of saying. Am I the right person to be saying this? How can you amplify this message to the larger community? And we'll talk strategy quite a bit. about how we can bring that message to the larger conversation. So yeah, don't be afraid to talk strategy. It's so very important.
And Mihoko, you had a really interesting point to make about strong networks versus weak networks, and sometimes a weak network is a safer place to talk about certain things. Could you talk more about that?
So this is about weak ties, the importance of weak ties, and I think, so I read a book titled Someone to Talk to. Someone to Talk to. It was written by a sociologist, Dr. Mario Small. He's a sociologist, but anyway, so we tend to share more with strangers in a way, or not in a formal setting. It's risky to talk to close colleagues, for example, for many different reasons. You might worry about the repercussion of sharing something, but with strangers, you're just talking and having conversation. There's worries, and so in a way, interestingly, my hairstylist might know more about what I really think about open access strategies than my colleagues. So that's the research that I'm very much interested in, weak ties and having casual conversation rather than meetings.
So Nancy, you were vigorously nodding your head. Do you want to talk about weak and strong ties?
No, yes. I just agree with that whole concept of people outside my organization might know more about how I feel on a topic than because it's just safer. There's a level of vulnerability that you have to share things with your colleagues, and because I'm so new, I would say, I'm not sure that I've built that yet, but I can think about, for example, when I was at OhioNet and so that was where I was prior to coming to FIU, and I could almost give you the date when my trust in the people I worked with shifted to the point where I actually felt comfortable enough to share all the things, because it happened in the summer of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered. And I, as the only person of color working in a very small organization, I just came to a staff meeting and said, I'm not okay, and lost it because I didn't lose it, but I cried in front of my staff, which the way that I was brought up in leadership was an absolute thing that you never, ever do. So, but the fact that they could see me be human changed the nature of our relationships. I haven't had that sort of watershed moment yet at FIU, and don't know if or when that'll happen, but what I do appreciate is having colleagues like people here where I can have those conversations if I need to and feel like I am supported, which again, I do believe I'm supported at my organization. I just don't know yet to the depth that will go.
So Mihoko, I'm going to go back to what you said about what's the controversy about OA strategies, and like in a professional context where the stage is the debate or the discussion. What have you experienced in that context?
So I think organizational context is very important to discuss open access topics. So that's why I feel, so I've worked at many different institutions. I'm currently at Penn State. Previously, I worked at the California Digital Library. They're both large academic research institutions, but the culture and approach toward OA are very different. So I think that I tend to be very careful in making statements about work-related issues. And for example, when there was an opportunity to speak at the White House listening session, OSTP memo, and supporting early career researchers, I raised my hand in a way. An invitation came from Spark, and my dean said, it'll be so cool if somebody from Penn State spoke at White House. And casual comment sort of gave me a kind of permission to speak in a way. So I did go there, and also I went to even Spark's meeting to really see what other people were thinking. So I felt prepared, and it was kind of control space. We had a topic, and my dean supported. So I went. So yeah, but I don't know if the U.S. government was happy to hear that. I think that the government should pay for it. But anyway, but I think when you have an opportunity, and as I said before, opportunities do not come to you frequently enough, at least for some people. So, why not? And so that's how I feel.
Joyce, do you have anything that you'd like to add to those?
I think I can certainly see the value of some of those weaker ties. There have been many situations where I know that if I'm in a university-wide meeting, I feel a whole lot more comfortable speaking up about topics like open access and some other controversial topics, just because there's the sense that I have some of that expertise of knowing about information and how information works, and my colleagues know that. So yeah, whereas in a meeting of my colleagues, I think there's a lot of times more debate about some of those nuances, and your expertise is challenged a bit more. So yeah, I can see that.
And I'm going to have a lightning round here. What is your motivation when you feel you must speak out? And I'm going to start with Nancy.
So when issues of equity or injustice are involved, I feel like I have to speak out. So if it's something that doesn't just affect my profession, but frankly affects my children, I have 2 kids who are now adults. So if it's something that's going to impact their life in one way or another, I can't keep my mouth shut regardless of where I work. There's the short answer since it's a lightning round.
Mihoko?
For me, I have a strong sense of integrity and justice, giving voice to there are some important voices that might not be heard yet, so that's motivating me to share. So thinking about the benefit for the audience, the society, and myself too.
Joyce?
Yeah, absolutely. I also agree with you, Nancy, when it's issues that impact my 2 children. Absolutely, I will speak out. I also feel really compelled to give voice to the voiceless, who isn't at the table, and to give them the opportunity to speak. Because when we have diverse voices at the table, that's when we come up with better solutions to the problems that are facing us.
And after we had this discussion, we sort of discussed how often advocates or people who are speaking out, they're seen as the lone hero, but you've just heard how important a network is or your co-conspirators are. So I just want to push against a little that every lone hero probably has a whole network and a whole team behind them, or a whole community behind them. And I found that really interesting. So the last question we're going to discuss is the public stage, the effects of being recorded, and whether recording has now sort of invoked a kind of self-censorship. And Nancy would like to answer the question of, should you be on Twitter? So the question is really, do you think certain contexts now are causing us all to self-censor more or display more conformity? And I'm going to start with Nancy.
I think no one should be on Twitter, but that's just my personal opinion. It feels like a waste of time to me. But for us, the libraries, truly, before that text from the provost on a Saturday, I had already talked with our social media person to say, tell me how engagement on Twitter drives people to come and use FIU libraries. Because if it's not having a positive impact on our reputation or getting people to, then I don't see the business case, frankly, for using it. So I don't, and I do recognize that there, at least historically, have been tons of librarians on Twitter, and there are really good conversations happening, and I get all that, and I think those conversations are also happening in other places, so I don't think we have to rely on that one particular social media.
Mihoko, and then we're going to go to Q&A.
So even if I don't use social media myself, people around me are using it. So it's interesting. Recently, I published an article titled "How It Feels to Be Asian in U.S. Academic Libraries and Higher Education." So then I was surprised that I got an invitation to speak in front of Penn State Student Association. And like, why? Somebody tweeted about it, and students heard about it. So sometimes things go out of control. No, even if you don't do anything yourself, you cannot just control other people's behavior. So I'd say, don't be afraid. Just speak with power. I think that yeah, don't be afraid. That's how I feel. But citation can be kind of tricky. If you are writing something, things can be taken out of context, and very interesting to see. Sometimes if you follow up and see who cited your work and how, then you realize that, I don't know if this person really read my work carefully. So I think, again, you cannot control other people's behavior, but
And I just want to mention that Mihoko had more to that story and decided not to share it here because of what people might remember, the little snippet they might remember. So if anyone has a question, if you approach the microphone, you can ask it. And Joyce, can we see the results of the poll?
Sure.
That last one is an interesting one, you know? So the last thing we have, if no one has any questions, what is your, after our pre-briefing and this discussion, what is your takeaway?
Look at, I'm like, don't start with me. For real. I'm going to let Mihoko go first, or Joyce, because...
Joyce, why don't you go first?
Yeah.
I think my one takeaway is think about what happens if you don't speak up. What voice will fill that void? And what impact will that voice have on the conversation on the issue?
Mihoko?
yeah, I like that one. You took that. I think about the benefit. If you speak up, somebody else might benefit by listening to you. So it's not about you sometimes. So believe in yourself and share your thoughts and share the space with others. Thank you.
I like both of those. And I would also say that speaking up, my takeaway is that speaking up is not enough. It is like the first step in hopefully many. So absolutely use your words, but also follow those words with some action, because again, the performative kind of work doesn't really get us anywhere, but the work that you're willing to take on based on what you said will help us make some progress on some challenging issues.
And with that, we are at time. Thank you very much for your attention for the panelists. Thank you.